Fantastic. Great to have you here, Ruth. Ruth is joining me, the Trade Commissioner for San Francisco. Let's kick off. Really excited to have this conversation. Ruth, why don't you just start by just giving us a little bit of a background about your story that brings you here to us today.
Firstly, thanks, Michael, for having me. And hello, listener. We talked about that, didn't we?
My mother.
Yeah. So I'm the Trade Commissioner for NZT based in San Francisco. A little bit about my background. It's a pretty standard background, really. I did a BA Com at Auckland University, like many in my generation, which I think just sneakily is also your generation, Michael. We left for overseas. I spent 11 years overseas, lived in Melbourne, Munich, New York, came back, had a attachment at that stage. Well, I still do. A wife, a husband, and a son. And we decided to raise our son his early years in New Zealand, and then spent about 12 years in New Zealand, then came back to the States, this time on the West Coast, came here in July 2020.
And here we are. What are you most passionate about? What is it that really gets you up in the morning?
Look, it's related to my job, so bear with, but the two things I'm really passionate about, one is actually helping New Zealand founders and their teams succeed over here, which fortunately is also my job, but I just love being surrounded by smart people who are super ambitious and have the chutzpah to actually look at this market and say, we can make a go of it. So I just love helping them every day. And we help all different sizes of business out of New Zealand. So just talking to a listed company a couple of hours ago, and a couple of days ago, I was talking to somebody who trying to find their first customer in the US. So it's such a range of companies and at different stages here. I really enjoy that. And the second thing, because I'm going to say this so my team listen to this podcast, I'm going to make them. I'm really proud of the team we've built in North America, and I'm biased. I'm very proud of my team specifically. I have to say that. But they're all Americans. There are no Kiwis in my team. And the fact that they've chosen to work helping New Zealand, I'm very grateful for, but I'm really proud of the work that they do and the fact that they share our passion for helping Kiwis.
That sounds like you're in the right place and sounds like a lucky team. Nice. And just because I like to be a bit quirky on Swaying with Strangers, what's the one thing that if someone went looking to learn about Ruth Macleod, they wouldn't find online?
This would be a good answers in the chat kind of segment, wouldn't it? But what I'm going to tell you is that I am an avid All Blacks supporter. Now, before you think that's quite, run-of-the-mill, quite standard, everyone might say that. My husband refuses to watch a rugby game with me because I'm quite vocal during rugby games.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I scream a lot and yell a lot, and this will date this podcast, but on the weekend I went with another Kiwi to watch the All Blacks play Ireland at an Irish pub, and that in itself is probably quite an Irish thing to do. But so there were 3 Kiwis and 150 Irish people, and I said to my mate, I've just got to keep a lid on it or else we're going to get beaten up. And I managed to for, let's say, 76 minutes. And then the last 37 phases, I was up on my seat.
You wouldn't have been alone on that one.
Well, I was, because I was sea above, I was in an Irish pub. So I was the only one jumping up and down. And, it was weird what happened next. The pub emptied out. There were 3 Kiwis and basically the owner of the pub, and that was it. The Irish had packed up their games and gone home. Yeah.
Well, okay, we won't find out about you online. I like that. Now we do, and it's going to be online. Okay, let's get a little serious. You've been at NZT for a number of years, and when I first sort of met you many years ago, you were setting up and establishing the Beachhead advisory service within NZT. I think it's really interesting because it's still very much a big part of their offering and the way that they help companies. But what's the kind of the good and the bad of that in terms of how applicable that is to help Kiwi tech companies grow into offshore markets?
Yeah, and the first thing I'll say is that Beachheads wasn't my idea, but I looked after that program and I guess steered that program for half a dozen years or so. I think it's an incredible asset for New Zealand businesses, and I always encourage the companies that we work with to make an effort to work with our advisors. And the reason I do that is because we've taken time to find advisors who have got a lot of traits that we think are really important in terms of supporting customers. So number one, and this is kind of base level, they've got industry expertise and international expertise. So that's kind of table stakes. But what we really look for in our deliberate recruitment of advisors in New Zealand and around the world is a good deal of empathy for the founder and the company journey. So these advisors are hand selected for their expertise and their EQ, and they are, I think, exceptional at asking excellent questions of our founders and our founders' teams to help that founder and that team navigate their own path to growth. There's no two companies' experience is going to be identical, but there are similarities in the growth journey. And these advisors are very good at sort of tapping into their own expertise and knowledge of what's worked for them and what hasn't, and then relay it in a way that's digestible. And it's not a mismatch. It's not like these advisors are telling you what to do and they know better than you. But what we look for is advisors that have gone through that growth journey, good and bad, and can say, hey, here's what I might do differently, and here's what you need to be thinking about.
Look, I think that's important, especially that age and stage of growth and the type of company and person. I'm going to just go a little deeper here. It's interesting right now, fractional, this whole idea of fractional leadership and fractional executives is kind of, very hot.
Yeah.
In your mind, when an advisor, when a fractional, how do you think that might play out for a CEO, founder?
I think it comes down to bandwidth and the team's bandwidth. I mean, advisors, if I think about the Beachheads context, advisors aren't going to sit there and help you do what you need to do. What they're going to do is set out a roadmap with you. Now, I'd probably look at fractional. Once I had a roadmap and I looked at that and think, actually, this is outside of my area of expertise, or this is going to stretch me so much that I'm going to drop another couple of balls here. So that's when I'd be looking to a fractional to say, okay, this is a discrete piece of work, or it might not be. It might be over a long period of time. But I think the important thing before you engage a fractional person is be really clear on what it is the outcome that you're looking for, so that you know the type of fractional that you need. That would be kind of my steer.
The advisor can help organize that thinking and that roadmap ready for a fractional to be able to come in and deliver. And you're right, especially at that early stage, it has to be high impact, high value, not just sitting in and ideating. It's got to be delivering business outcome.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly as you say in that early stage, there's not time for pontificating. There's not time for endless brainstorming. It's time for action and momentum. And if a fractional will allow you to build momentum, I think it's definitely worth investigating.
And look, that leads nicely to, it's something, even with the fractional piece for us at Swaytech, is about imparting capability. So leaving our companies that we work with what we call a marketing mindset, which is something we believe for companies in scale up mode, that idea of marketing as an investment, delivering the great customer experience and customer centered everything is a very key mindset that's not specific to a marketing department, but more across that leadership team. What does the marketing mindset mean to you? And have you seen that play out in some of the companies that you're working with at the moment?
Yeah, for me, a marketing mindset is simply a customer focus.
Yeah.
So I don't think, and look, I know Swaytech is in the business of marketing. I haven't set this up. You are not paying me. But for me, it is simply a customer mindset. So it's an orientation, which means every person in the business is thinking about the actual user, the customer, thinking about the customer journey, their experience with your product, their experience with your team. It's simply about that. It's not optional to have that sort of focus. Marketing is an enabler for a great customer experience, but of course it's not the only pillar to an excellent customer experience. So in short, marketing mindset means you're very, very focused on delivering value to your customer, and that permeates the organization. I think who does it well, I feel like companies like FileInvite, LawView are hyper-focused on getting inside the brain of the customer and delivering value for their ICP. And I think that's, to me, the key of the marketing mindset, is that there's clarity on who your ideal customer is, and everybody understands who they are and why they derive value from using your software or service.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Who who do you think owns that then inside a company? Like, where does that come from?
That's an interesting question. I think it may depend on how you structure your organization. Ultimately, though, I think the CEO has to be the champion for the customer. And if they're not, then I think there's a challenge ahead, because if they're not, and they, let's say, devolve that responsibility to a CMO or chief revenue officer or head of customer success, then that person has a role convincing the rest of the organization that the customer should be at the center of their decision making. And that's not easy for an individual who is not the CEO to do. So ultimately, it's the CEO's role to understand that and how it impacts the rest of how the business operates.
And they can lean on those other roles that you mentioned. And those other roles that you mentioned can obviously play a pivotal part in bringing it to life. But I think you're saying that that essence of customer first in every meeting, in every discussion, that it centers around what's going on with my customer is kind of what you're saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that really has to sit with the CEO. That's leadership. I haven't been a CEO, so you can tell me, but leadership of the organization is one thing, and putting customer at the center is the other, and probably keeping the board happy.
Yep. And look, I'm just going to go one level deeper here, because I think we see a lot of tech companies founded by incredibly smart engineering, product, technical people. How, what do you say to them where they may not be their comfortable place being out there talking to or being part of that customer? How do they, build that marketing mindset around them in that way?
Yeah, if it's not your company place, I would look at who is around you that can help you navigate those conversations. But rather than getting too theoretical, it needs to start with, if you're a founder engineer, it needs to start with who are you building your product for?
Yeah.
And, I believe those founders are deeply curious about who they're solving for. So for me, it's just taking that and scaling it. You were deeply curious when you founded the company about the customer and who you're solving for. You've just got to do that at scale and make sure you bring the rest of the company along the journey with you about why you started it in the first place.
I think you're right. And they are very deeply curious. It's one of those things, and that there's often a problem that they encounter that they wanted to go out and solve. So, yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. And look, the marketing mindset piece leads us to, I think, how do companies in New Zealand scale? They go offshore. And New Zealand markets are small, and so that is the ultimate journey for many organizations. And we're having a lot of conversations at the moment. Australia, the US. Australia's close. The US is further but bigger. You're obviously in the US, and part of your role is to help New Zealand companies land and be successful. Hence why you're based in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. So talk to me about your experience and why you might pick the US market, and what are some of those criteria or indicators or things inside your business that would lead you to then select the US, and then we'll go a bit deeper as to go, well, and then how are you successful if you go there?
Yeah, well, the listener's going to get bored of me saying this, but I can't tell the company whether the US or Australia is right, but my team and our advisors can help them with the inputs into the decision making. And the first input is, where is your ICP? Go from TAM, SAM, SOM, where actually is it? And do that in a methodical, insight-driven way, not in a gut feel kind of way. If you do it on population alone, naturally the US is always going to come on top of any kind of criteria, right? But the level of sophistication required is, where is that ICP? What's my cost to acquire that ICP? How will it differ between the US and Australia? What competitive advantages do I have in both markets? I think there's a set of criteria, and any company thinking about which market is right for me will have their own set of criteria, which will be entirely valid, that they should put into the mix, including things like what's our risk appetite and what's our risk reward, because what we can say about the US is that it is going to be more expensive. It's going to take you longer. I know less about Australia, but just on flights alone, it's not going to cost you as much, right? But if you're coming to market 4 or 5 times a year, can you afford that? That's got to be a criteria. So definitely start with your customer, start with your TAM, SAM, SOM, get really clear on that. Put in the criteria you think is important. Get others around you to say, well, what other decisions or what other criteria should I be thinking about? And before long, you'll have literally a set, and you can weigh up the pros and cons of each market, whatever markets they are.
Yeah. And that then becomes part of that go-to-market rigor. And so let's just say, if you've gone through that process and you've gone, great, the US looks like we've got a risk appetite, the ICP is there, we're picking a coast. What does that first step look like? Is it a pilot? Is it, how do you launch? Yeah.
Well, if you haven't come here, step one is being here. And it's interesting to me how we talk to a number of companies who are absolutely dead set on the US, but are not in a position to actually travel here and see it for themselves. And if that's the case, I'd sort of caution whether in fact you're ready for the US. Because if you can't come here and smell it and see it and experience it, you're already on the back burner, right? You're already on the back foot, I should say. So the steps for me, Michael, do as much from New Zealand as you can to make your ICP, then come here and talk to them. Literally go in and hang out where they hang out, make the meetings, because each stage of that, what might seem like quite indulgent market discovery, what I've heard from the companies that have done it in that way say it pays back in spades. So don't think of that first year or even 18 months as a revenue generating opportunity. Think of it as laying the foundations, market discovery, intel gathering. It'll put you in a really strong position to be much more accurate about what it's going to take to grow here, and the decisions that come at that point, things like, do I put boots on the ground? Do I bring a Kiwi up? Do I hire locally? Those decisions become much more clear if you put in that groundwork.
And who's going up? And you say, go be there, smell it. I love that. Who in the company would you advocate what's the group, the forward group?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the size of your company, but I think 9 times out of 10, it's got to be the CEO.
And what about, and that's because the CEO is the salesperson typically, and obviously doing this selling, or is that because the CEO's lead?
No, I mean, the CEO particularly the founder is often the founder CEO is often, the first head of sales. Yes, that's true. They're the ones probably closest to the product. They've got a better understanding and can sort of parse the information and relate it back to the business. But I think it's more about they've got to feel in their bones that this is the right decision. And they've got to experience that to truly know that.
And you're right, you can't do that from a conference call. You can't do that, remotely. You've got to go there. And
I think if I just take a little detour briefly, we just had a group of 15 New Zealand businesses that came through on a study tour of the US, and they were from different industries, from crayons through to adventure tourism. What else did we have? We had a parking management software company, right? So it's an eclectic group of different businesses. They were here for 8 days, New York and San Francisco, and they were exposed to companies like Airbnb and Slack and you name it, insert large company name here. What they took away in 6 days completely changed the way they thought about growth. One of the things it did for all of those companies, and I had the pleasure of spending a bunch of time with them, including in kind of the wrap-up, they all thought about their business and the potential scale of their business entirely differently. So I think, we tend to look at New Zealand out to the world, and that has a certain, will take us to a certain place. But once you come here and you see the size of this market, what does that actually mean? Have I been pitching here in terms of my growth aspirations, but actually could I pitch here? And if I wanted to pitch here, what would my business need to look like for that to be true? And I had a conversation with one of the companies actually, and they acknowledged that they needed to be on the ground more. And I was asked, is 3 or 4 times a year enough? And I said, actually, that's the wrong question. The right question, I think, to ask yourselves is, what do you want that company to be? If you want to be $100 million company, what does that look like? What does your US entity and structure look like? Because I guarantee it's not 4 times a year. It's a completely different equation, right? So I think it's getting here, getting exposed to the scale, exposed to how others are doing it. It's just a mind-blowing thing. And I kind of, now having been in the States a couple of years, I think in total 7 or 8 years now, I'm a bit blank to it. So it's quite interesting seeing it through the eyes of others who aren't as experienced here.
Like a kid in a candy store, I'm sure, walking
Yeah.
around. Yeah. So let's just talk a bit about scale. You mentioned that a couple of times in there. I love the reframing of the question. It's not about how many times you want to be here. It's about how big you want to be, and that requires scale.
Yeah.
There are some traits of being a Kiwi that are good and bad. In your experience, what are those good and bad? What are the things that make Kiwis more successful when they commit to this large $100 million vision of a company, and then what can hold us back a little bit? What are the gotchas?
Yeah, I think what makes us successful is that we are adventurous and we'll give things a go. Bless our number 8 wire. That's takes us to a certain point. The flip side of number 8 wire, of being adventurous and giving it a go and trying it yourself, the shadow side, I should say, of number 8 wire is that we try to do it ourselves. So at some point, and I don't know what it is, it will depend on your business. At some point, the expertise required to grow your business is going to outgrow you. And I think we take a little bit too long to figure that point out. So we still are fixated on we can do it ourselves, when in fact it would be smarter, quicker, faster. Quicker and faster are the same things. It would be smarter and faster to actually bring others around you who can propel you forward. So number 8 wire, blessing and curse.
And I think we also have this should be right. I mean, how hard can it be kind of approach to life? And that's the beauty of being a Kiwi, and gets all of us into those crazy places as we travel the world. But also do you think that can sort of maybe be us not prepared for what needs to happen?
Yeah, I think, what, I'm seeing less of the she'll be right, and maybe it's kind of the businesses that we're working with are definitely serious on the States. I think what I see us do, and particularly if you're selling through channel partners, and, channel partners, be they consultants or platforms, if you're looking to scale fast, it's a really good option. So what I see us doing is perhaps being a little bit naive in hoping, which we know is not a strategy, hoping that channel partner is going to rain cash down on the business. So, and we're working with a company at the moment who had an excellent relationship with a channel partner, the same channel partner in Australia, that they were entering into a new channel partnership in the US. And so what they had hoped and assumed was that because they had a really great relationship in Australia, that would mean they'd have they'd sort of be starting from here and they would just absolutely take off. Now that hasn't happened. They're 2 entities, same company, 2 entirely different markets, and it's stalled basically. It hasn't gone anywhere near the projections that they'd hoped. So I think we are somewhat guilty of absolving market growth to third parties, and without taking a professional management approach to channel partnership. I think that's something I'm seeing as a pain point, and something we're not crash on it.
I can understand that. I think a lot of the companies we work with, they talk a lot about channel strategy for scale, but unless the organization, the CEO, leadership team really understands what that means and the difference between your direct sales force and channel, that's not there in the DNA, then it's unlikely, you end up with this hope. I love that. Like, we all like a bit of hope, but you've got to have some execution and some action underneath to activate that.
100%. And I've speaking, as I said a couple of hours ago, to a large company in New Zealand that has from day one sold through channel partners. And it means, to your point, it's in their DNA. But even they acknowledge when they came to the US, they actually acquired a channel partner. And that, I think their channel partner meant they had 4 times as many channel partners because it was a cascading, not a pyramid scheme, but a cascading thing. They were inundated with channel partners. So even though it was in their DNA, they had to completely rethink their channel management approach. The good news is there are people in New Zealand that are doing this and doing it well and are prepared to help you out if you ask the question.
And again, it's part of that go-to-market strategy and that ambition. If you're going to be $100 million company, how are you going to build your sales force? What does that look like? What does scale look like? And this is a very powerful way. Okay.
The other thing that I see from time to time is when channel partnerships don't work out, companies go, well, therefore it must mean I need to go direct, and that will be more straightforward. And it's not. But not too fine a point on it. It's really not. Both are equally challenging. I would say, in a horse race, if you managed your channel, you're more likely to succeed simply because of the scale play. Direct is much more incremental, right?
If you're dealing with $100 million average deal sizes, then direct is probably okay because but I think and I remember way back, obviously my time at IBM, I did a lot of channel work where one of the sales managers put up his hand and said, if you're a direct salesperson, you can deal with 5 deals at a time. If you've got a channel, you can deal with 5 channel partners who can deal with 5 deals. And now you've got 25 for the same amount of work. And that's the scale model. I think look, and it's interesting. I think as we start to see more and more companies grow offshore, getting that access to expertise in that space, is that something inside NZTE with the Beachhead or just within your network you have capability of? Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. And we've got companies, and one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and I think it works well, is we have companies that say to us, we're happy to talk to other businesses who are coming to the US and can learn from us. And so many New Zealand companies are prepared to help other New Zealand companies, and we're behind the scenes making those introductions. And I think that's super valuable because it's not just us saying, hey, I think you need to consider this. It's actually their peers.
Yeah, that's nice. Look, it's interesting. I think when we talked before, there are it's quite a few learnings that you've had over your time in NZTE, but also in the US. And I think you sort of referred them as some of Ruth's truisms of things that you might live and die by. And I guess I'm interested, like, what would be the 3 things that in your world that you might want to go, right, guys, here's some truths. Let's go. Let's see what they are according to Ruth, the world according to Ruth.
Ruth's truths? I'm sure I didn't say that. I'm sure. Hey, let's imagine I did.
You did now.
Coming to the US, listener, you know what I'm about to say. Get here. That's number 1. The second thing I would say is be incredibly tight on your customer value proposition and the articulation of your elevator pitch. As Kiwis, this is not our strong suit. We are not great at this. So make sure you get that really clear. And kind of a sub point to that, I think an interesting sort of thought, well, more than a thought experiment, an interesting experiment you might want to try is to go to your entire team, depending on the size of your business, and ask them, hey, Michael, why do you think customers buy from us? And how would you articulate your value proposition? And just see what bubbles up there. Because I think even if you've got a 5-degree difference of opinion, then what you've got is a massive disparity of communication and messaging about your product. So that's something I do really early on and at different times as you evolve. Why do customers buy? What's our value proposition? I would do that. And then probably the third thing, I don't know if it's the Ruth's truth, but gosh, I don't like that. The last thing would be think about your return on investment and think about what it costs to acquire your first 10 customers, your first 100 customers. Think about the money and the resources that it's going to take, and be really brutally honest about that. Similar to my channel conversation, you'll have a sense, if you've grown in Australia or New Zealand, you'll have a sense of what it costs to acquire a customer. But you take that and then put it in the US context. Think about the investment you're going to have to make and before you actually return. And newsflash, it's going to be not pretty. It's going to take you longer and it's going to cost you more. But we often see businesses with quite a lean, shall we say, investment in this market when in fact they see it as their biggest potential market. But I get it, they're not comfortable really betting the farm. But at some point you've got to think about, am I prepared to put in what it's going to take to actually achieve the target that I'm hoping to achieve?
I like that. I'm going to come back to number two. I think you talked about the ICP being, crystal clear on that, talking to everyone in the business. I think that's really important. And I think from a marketing perspective, you mentioned this 5% off. We see that a lot, where that 5% starts off here, but as you go out and suddenly you've got marketing saying something very different that's winning new business, and then when the business comes in and experiences the product, it's different to what the product is doing, to how customer success then shows up, and that creates misalignment and wasted resource. So I think that's an important piece. Okay, and just I guess to wrap up here, what is, you've just shared some three really kind of key core pieces of truth advice, in terms of success. What would you say to a CEO or founder who's sitting down at the moment, looking at next year, looking at projections and growth? And I'm talking about an ambitious CEO or founder who's going, look, this business I want it to grow. I'm ready to take some of the risks. Where do you start? Like, what's that one piece of advice that you're going to impart on to them?
Yeah, this is going to sound flippant. It's not. I would say to that CEO, I hope you're not doing that alone. So who are you bringing around you to help you form that opinion? Because if it's just you, controversially, it's going to be wrong. So who are you bringing in to help you form your hypotheses that you can then test in the market?
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't reiterate that more. And I think, in our world at marketing, when we see a CEO with the right people around that top table, ready to tackle those, the big meaty questions, you can see the magic begin to happen as that team leads in. And it takes a team to come up with all of the different pieces to be able to get that right. So
I agree. And one of the things that I've observed and seeing probably hundreds of companies down my 20 years at NZTE is I'm forming a view on an archetype of CEO that I think is, while they might not be successful in the current business for whatever reason, I think that they do go on to be very successful. And that archetype is enormously curious. And you and I think, talked about the curiosity quotient. Well, we've talked about IQ and EQ for a long time. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, the concept of the curiosity quotient started to get some legs. And the CEOs I enjoy the most, because they're just very good humans, and they're good humans because they're very curious. So watching them as they discover markets or networking or whatever it might be, their minds are completely open. So I guess the growth fixed mindset, I know that less, but I think if you're enormously curious as you're building your plan as a CEO, and if you impart, curiosity into your business, I think that's such a winning attribute, a winning sort of cultural pillar to be successful. And I think I had the pleasure of going to Microsoft last year in Redmond and Seattle, so Microsoft sort of HQ, the holy grail. And I was a little bit nervous because I'm thinking, here I am from old New Zealand, and through a really fantastic woman, Hayley Horan, we actually got access to senior execs, very senior execs at Microsoft. And what I was absolutely astounded by was the culture of Microsoft. And I got really interested in what happened at Microsoft, because I had an impression based on some people that I knew that worked there, and from the 90s and the 2000s, I had a certain impression, which I won't talk about Microsoft. And so I realized I was holding on to that as I went into these meetings, right? And then I got curious about what had changed, right? What I found in the executives is that they were open, talkative, very interested in what I was doing, very interested in my Australian counterpart who was with me, absolutely conversational. And one of the execs we met was one down from Sachin Nadella, the CEO, right? These were the big cheese, right? And so what I learned was that Sachin Nadella, when he came in, and he's written books about it, etc., he came in and he recognized the culture was not great. And he coined the phrase, we're going from a know it know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. And
Love
you
that.
could just see it in Microsoft. They, with all the might, power, et cetera, they were sponges for what we had to say, and that blew me away. So a long way of saying that curiosity quotient is a pillar really sitting within Microsoft, and I think we could learn a lot from it.
Love it. Move from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. There's something in that. Okay, brilliant. Couple of quick fire questions just to close us out. What AI, boom or bust? What are you seeing?
Hang on, wait. I've got a magic 8 ball. For listener, I'm just going to get my magic 8 ball.
You're a chat GPT? No.
Yeah. So I'm curious about AI because I have to be, because I said that was important. But no, I've just started an AI course actually, which is, it's called a mini MBA, which is just marketing. It's run by Professor Scott Galloway, and I tuned into the first lecture today, and he's an AI optimist. And the point he made was that throughout sort of history of industrial change and new technology, there's been a lot of fear about what that might bring, and job losses is being one of them, right? And he made the point that if you think about automation in the car industry, the initial technology, well, the initial bump was actually a reduction, I should say, in roles. But cut to today, there are more people employed in the car industry than there ever have been, enabled by technology. So I think AI, it's going through a massive hype cycle, but this is something we have to get our heads around. And a little plug, we'll pop it in the show notes. There's a webinar, actually an in-person event coming up in Wellington, which is called, I'm looking at my screen, Gone by Lunchtime, How AI Will Eat Your Industry. So it's happening November the 9th. And I think we've all just got to get our heads around it. The other part of what he was talking about, which I really loved, was that AI is going to enable those businesses that have been sitting on lakes of data. They just couldn't understand how to wrap their arms around it and make something useful of it, i.e. get insights. So I think the generative AI is going to allow so many more businesses to parse that data and actually make sense of what they're seeing, which is pretty exciting. So, right now I've drunken the juice. It's my first lecture. I'm all about AI, all about it.
So we would call you an AI optimist then. I think you just put yourself in that camp. Love it.
Yeah, and I've got a little factoid, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this little factoid, but he made the point that when Microsoft in July announced it was going to add AI to its Microsoft Office suite, its market cap went up in one day the value of Disney, which went up in one day by $154 billion in 24 hours.
That's incredible. That's great factoid. That's great.
It's outrageous, right? So it's all people are talking about in Silicon Valley, and yeah, I mean, it's hype cycle time, but I think the opportunity is there for all of us to embrace it and just to understand it. The other point he made, then I'll promise I'll stop. He said today 1 in 200 people are computer programmers, but if we all understand how to master the prompt, there's no reason why we can't all be computer programmers, which I thought was a really interesting way to think about it.
It is, and I think we're starting to see that in all sorts of different fields, especially in marketing and sales, where suddenly people who are not technical can be delivering quite technical design, analysis, etc. It's great. We're feeling sort of freed from the shackles of not being tech. I love that. Yeah. Okay. And look, just to finish, what are you reading? What are you watching? Obviously, apart from doing an MBA in marketing and AI, what?
Yeah. Well, it's a mini MBA, by the way, before anyone gets excited. I'm more of I lost my Kindle a couple of months ago, so I've stopped reading. I don't know how to read anymore, but I'm a avid podcast listener. So I listen to on a regular basis, Pivot, which is Professor Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher. I listen to the Prof G podcast, Wall Street Tech News Briefing, Barron Streetwise, and listener, I'm a fan of true crime, so you can find me listening to Dateline sometimes, but I really enjoy the podcasts. Also, the one that might not be on people's radar, I'm sure you've heard of the ones I've just mentioned, but I've started listening to a New York Times podcast called The Hard Fork, It's tech-based, but the two guys are hilarious. A very sort of, I think, New Zealand sensibility in how they analyze tech. The one episode I listened to recently, they'd taken the Waymo self-driving car in San Francisco, and the whole podcast was them in the Waymo. It was hilarious. Anyway, the Hard Fork New York Times is a really goodie.
Someone recommended that last week, and I can attest to that. It is quite funny and entertaining and educational as well. So, yeah, well done. Look, listener, that's been Ruth Macleod, Trade Commissioner, San Francisco. Thank you so much, Ruth. Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.